Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the JK Experience. Hey, listen, there is no James today, but I think I got a much better looking dude and a much better qualified guy to be in that seat right there. James probably wouldn't agree with me on this, but it's okay. Dominic Rufran, man, it is so good to have you like here, man, in the podcast room. I know you and I went on the tour. We've kind of caught up, dude. Thanks for coming all the way up to Big Casper, man.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It's honestly a real pleasure, be able to see the office and see where you handle your business. And I know you said that the best looking guy in the room. I don't believe that at all. I mean, just look at you, man. It's hard to believe that you even said that.
Well, whatever, buddy. Well, we'll let the audience poll on that one right there for sure, buddy. Hey, dude, I am so excited to have you here. And the conversation we're going to have today, I'm just really excited about unfolding this because, you'd put a post out there. I don't know how long ago it was, but we happened to see it. And Shay with True North Media, I remember her instant messaging me about like, hey, we need to respond to this guy. And I'm like, absolutely, this is totally up my alley. This is where my heart's at, my passion's at. And your post was really about, hey, listen, as a former professional athlete, when that's over and you have to get into the real world, like that's not an easy transition, right? And I've had the fortunate opportunity to talk to a lot of our other athletes, and as a former athlete, that was exactly my heartbreak. That was something that I had to live through. So I know there's a need out there. There's a need out there. Thank goodness for social media. All the bad things that can happen on social media, these are one of the great things that I think that can happen out of it, is that you can connect with people that have a purpose and a passion like yours is. So, as a former, you're a University of Wyoming football player, professional athlete with the Falcons. And of course, I know you played a little bit of rugby and you kept active. I mean, it's like when we say former athletes, like it's not like you stopped being an athlete, by the way. But you have to get into life. You have to go into the reality of the situation. And now you're a professional in another area of life. But I just want to dive into it, man. We're just going to go right into the heart of this, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So my entire life was dedicated to what we were talking about, sports. Professional football was my goal since day one. Literally since I was 2 years old, I remember sitting there with my dad, watching Monday Night Football, doing push-ups, like just my dream. Watching Terrell Davis growing up, it was just like, no matter what I do in life, like that's what I'm going to do. Yeah. I would say, pronounce it to the world. My teachers would say, hey, you need to be realistic. My grandma would say, hey, you need to find a different path. You need to be a doctor, a lawyer, or something like. And I'm like, no, like that's not me. Yeah. I am so focused on it. I went to the depths of like ball is life. Like now I understand completely, like that was a very immature thought process because there's so much more to life than ball. But it was just that, like ball was life. I would sleep with my football at night. Like that was everything. Mm-hmm. So when I literally dedicate everything, my being to one thing, and then in the moment, just a snap and it's gone. Yeah. Right. It just rocked my world. Like everything just got shooken up. And I had to go through a lot of a trauma with depression, figuring out who I was, right? There's a point when you're just at the top of your game and everybody's calling your name, everybody loves you, everybody's sliding in your DMs and saying, hey, you got this, you're the best, you can do this. And then out of nowhere, it's over and nobody's reaching out to you anymore. And anytime anybody ever talks to you, it's like, what happened? Like, why aren't you playing anymore? Like, and that is just a struggle because you just feel like you're on an island by yourself and you're alone and like there's nobody there for you or there's nobody there walking with you.
Do you remember, I know you remember, would you talk about the day that it happened? Would you talk about like, when you say it was over like that? Because I remember the same thing. I mean, I know when it was over, right? Tell me, like, what was the emotions you felt that day when it was over and the reality sank in with you?
So for me, it's kind of a tough question because I was the individual that decided to hang up the cleats on my own at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. But I ended up hanging it up for reasons where I just felt like it was the right choice to do at the time. Mm-hmm. But regardless of it being my choice or not, like it still was just as tough. Yeah. I still remember when I was at camp with the Falcons, right? I ended up like pulling my hamstring. I ended up getting a couple calf cramps, and I just was like, I'm over, I'm done. Because I knew if I go out there and I'm just done altogether, if I go out there and I participate, I'm not going to be able to. So I ended up texting my trainer that day who said, hey, like, I'm done. Like, there's nothing that I can do. Like, I just can't compete anymore. And that feeling right there in that moment, I just started crying, and I cried for literally like 30 minutes in my dorm room. This was still during camp, like in the middle of camp. I'm literally crying to myself, like, it's over, it's done, like there's nothing left I can do, right? So what I ended up doing is he ended up responding back out to me and said, hey, like, you got to continue, just try. So I ended up getting wrapped up, took some ibuprofen. Like, I ended up making it through, but I wasn't my best self. So I knew regardless, it was still going to be over, and I wasn't going to get that opportunity anymore on top of that. So when I walked away from there, I was proud of who I was and what I did, and I was excited because I thought maybe there was another opportunity, but deep down I knew it was done. I ended up pursuing some other sports like professional indoor football in Nebraska afterwards.
Right.
And I never got another opportunity after that. And when I decided that it was no longer done, that thought of like, wow, I am literally hanging up these cleats for good, and I'm never putting them back on again to compete at a high level. It was just distraughting, like, altogether. It's almost hard to even explain that feeling that you go through, because it's like you're at the bottom of a pit, and it's not just the feeling of it's done. It's like, well, what now?
Right.
Like, I mean, I think that's one of the hardest things. It's like you've devoted everything to this one thing for so long, and then out of nowhere it's done. It's like, what do I do with my life now? Like, I'm lost.
Yeah. How old were you at the time?
So that would have been I was a 22-year-old kid, I think, at that time was when it was. Yeah.
And you're 26 now.
26. Yep.
So the game is over. You've hung the cleats up, right? What do you do from there? Like, you're in Nebraska. Is that where you were at the time?
Mm-hmm.
And you're living in, were you living in Colorado Springs still? Were you in Denver at the time? Like, tell me where you were at with, like, where was home base for you?
So home base was, I was born in Colorado Springs. Home base was Denver. So I ended up driving out to Nebraska to play indoor arena ball, and I played like 3 or 4 games. And then there was another opportunity to go play. It was called the Major League Football. It was MLFB, and it was like one of the, like how the XFL is right now. They planned on starting that, and then ended up falling apart. Like 99% of the other leagues that end up falling apart.
Right.
So I had my plane ticket ready to go, like to go out to the to MLFB. It was supposed to be like the spring league for the NFL, and I was excited. And so like I left the Nebraska, like I went home, and literally like 2 days before the flight, they sent out a massive email saying, hey, like, the league got folded under, like, this isn't going to be a thing anymore. And at that point, I was like, I'm broken, and I'm tired of putting my fate in somebody else's hands. Like, I need to let go for the injury purposes, for my soul, right? My soul was chasing the wrong things, and I was like, okay, it's time for me to let go of this and pursue something else.
Yeah. Were you married at the time?
No, I wasn't. I actually just recently got married, which was September 28th. So this was, like 4 or 5 months ago?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so you're still in the honeymoon stage right now.
Yeah, you could definitely say that. That's what I hear. We actually did just get back from the honeymoon. So
did you? Congratulations, buddy. That's
Thank
awesome.
you.
So who was your support, right? I mean, I remember going through that, and for me, when my career was over, and I realized, and I did have the choice too. I mean, I realized, just like what you were saying. Listen, I can either choose to have this over, or I can have somebody tell me it was over. And I was already broken, right? I was like, man, my arm was shot. It was like, this isn't the life that I want to live anymore. This is the reality that I've created is not like the same reality that I was living before, right? Because especially as you go from the NFL to now you're going into these independent leagues, and it's a different world, man. And it is not. I mean, and it's not the game that you were used to. It's not even UW, right? It's not Division I football. So you're even more heartbroken that you're like, man, this is what I'm playing right now. Like my potential is so much greater than this, but this is what it's resorted to. And so when that was over, like, I mean, did you have a support staff around you, or was it just you literally feeling like, I mean, we know we feel like we're on an island already, but did you have people around you that were supporting you?
So I had, family that was always going to be there for me regardless. But they would support me no matter what I did, but they just didn't understand the way that I felt because they've never experienced sports at all. Like, I was essentially the first person in my family to ever play sports at a very high level. So I had no guidance. I had no mentorship there. I was literally just trying to figure it out on my own, but they were there to support in every single way. So me being a leader and being a Leo and being a strong man, I kept everything to myself. I kept it in. I didn't talk about it much. Like I didn't talk about this subject of the way I felt until years after the game was over. And I don't think that's healthy. One, I think that we need a community, because I think that's the biggest thing is like when you're in a team sport, you have that brotherhood, you have that friendship, you have that group around you where you can lean on it all the time. But when you're done and you're out, there's nobody left for you to lean on anymore. You can't just like, hey, like I'm going to the locker room. It's like, well, hey, I got to go find a way to pay my car bill now, right? So you're like on an island, like you said, we feel like we're on an island, but it's not because we just feel like it, it's because we are. There's not enough people around us that are experiencing the same things for us to relate to, which is why I love exactly what you're doing, you know, with this podcast, is because you're bringing community together for individuals to talk about their struggles and what they went through and to give hope to the next person. So they can understand like, hey, there's other people that went through it. Like reach out to somebody and talk with them and get some advice from that person, because we're more than open to having that conversation with people now, knowing that what we went through.
Right. Well, one of the things that I absolutely admire, and I love what you're being able to do now, is like you're having these conversations 4 years after this. It took me 13, right? 13 years of my life of feeling the way that you felt over the last 4 years. And whether that's regret or whether that's just, but that was my journey, right? And you're on your journey right now too. I guess the question for me that I have for you now is like, okay, so how did you make such a fast turn, right? I mean, with having support, and I would agree, and I had a great support system, man. My dad was like my best friend, and, he was there to sympathize with me. My family was there. At the time, I was married. I am married still, the same woman, loving, and she is awesome, right? They were all there, but just like you said, they just don't understand. It's like we're speaking in a foreign language because they didn't understand how many nights we poured ourselves into that sport. I'm sure just like me, I'm sure that you envisioned not just your career, but you envisioned your Hall of Fame speech. You envisioned getting into the Hall of Fame. You envisioned retiring. You knew exactly where you were going to retire. You knew exactly what you were going to do when you retired. I mean, like, it wasn't just about the career. It was about the entire life that you envisioned, and then you were going to accomplish that. And then when that's taken away, it's like, I am a failure, right? So how did you go from, I got a great support system, but I'm on an island, and now I actually find that I do have a purpose, or that I do need to connect with other people, because so many people continue to go down that pit. So many people spiral down and they can't identify that, listen, I got to start crawling out of this, man. And it seems like you've been able to do that.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is perspective, right? I think in a world of 8 billion people, like if I'm going to look on a scale of where do I fit in those 8 billion people, I think one, I have it pretty good, right? I know that there's individuals right now that are struggling for food, that are born with their feet on backwards, that are shunned from their environment, that the village doesn't want nothing to do with them, right? So prospectively, regardless of how I'm feeling or what I'm going through, one, I know that I have it a whole lot better. So that one just puts things in perspective for me on a day-to-day basis, because even to this day, even though now I feel like I have purpose, I still struggle. Like I still struggle with finding, what am I passionate about? Like, is this really my passion, or is this really my purpose? Like, is this really what God has called me to? Like every day I wake up, I'm pursuing something, but I have to question it every so often, is like, am I really down the right path of what Christ is really wanting me to do? And some days I'm like, yeah, this is it. This is perfect. My aligned perfectly. And then some days I wake up, I'm like, maybe I need to reevaluate, right? So, from the piece of when you're having to fill that void, I don't know, and you might be able to answer this a whole lot better because you've been, 13 years removed. I don't know. For me, I haven't found it yet where I'm like, I'm 100% locked into this is my purpose. Like all I know right now, my purpose is to help other people and to give back in the best way that I can. But I don't necessarily know the vehicle to put that in, right? Whatever that vehicle is, I'm not exactly sure. So the biggest thing, how I made that transition though completely, is I just had to focus and work on myself, and I had to see everything in perspective. So a lot of that had to do with reading books, personal development, getting around like-minded people like yourself, hearing other people's stories, and just gravitating onto something bigger than myself. And knowing that, my life is such a short life in comparison to eternity also helps me put things in perspective. Like, hey, like at the end of the day, it was just a game. And when I can see it as it's just a game, and it was just a platform for me to impact, then it makes me realize like now, like I'm still in a game and I still have a platform, right? Like you still have a platform with your real estate and all these other businesses that you run. Like we still have a platform, but we can still impact the same way. It's just not within the same vehicle.
Yeah. And I mean, it's great. I think you're right on. You're so right on in everything that you were saying there. I think the things that I'm hearing and I came away from that was first is you had humility in your life, right? And I think that's a really hard thing. You know, when you are the center of everything, when you have so many people telling you how great you are, when everything that you say, people are always like, "Oh my God, that was brilliant. Oh, that was awesome." They're wanting your autograph, right? And you feel special. You feel like, okay, this is why you created me, right? I think that with the fact that you showed humility and going, say, listen, I'm not the center of the world here. And there are far greater issues than me not playing football, right? That takes a long time for most people to realize. It took many more years for me to realize that. And you were able to do that pretty fast. I really love how you said that you had to lead yourself first, because we talk about leadership skills all the time in our podcast and even just in our companies. And the thing that we always go back to, the thing that I realized is that you have to learn to lead yourself first. You cannot be a great leader. You cannot be a great leader for other people if you have not led yourself first, if you haven't realized the things that you need to develop within yourself, right? And that's that's disciplines. That's, that's how to articulate your value. That's how to live a life that is for other people. And I think you kind of hit a lot of those right there, man. So, I mean, I really applaud you that you, at such a young age, you've realized that. That is absolutely amazing, because most people don't realize those things until it's like that midlife crisis. Like, dude, I'm 50 years old and what am I like I've surrounded myself with a bunch of jackasses and I don't know what my purpose is. And yeah, I've got money, but I don't have a really great marriage. And I don't have a good relationship with my kids, but yeah, I've got wealth because they've chased the wrong things. Right. And they thought leadership was creating wealth in their life. And leadership was actually, they weren't showing leadership skills at all. Right. So I feel like you've got a lot of that already going for you in that momentum. So once again, I really applaud you in that. My question, I guess, as a follow-up is like, okay, so you've kind of identified this stuff now. Like, how do you see yourself moving forward, right? So you've got a great business with insurance going on right now. You've got your podcast that you're going to be releasing, which is awesome. Tell everybody about the podcast on your end, and like, what's your vision for that? What's the vision for your life as you see it right now in this chapter?
For sure. And, just to kind of touch back on some of the things you're saying, I'm a firm believer that people see you the way you see yourself, right? So if you see yourself as a leader, you see yourself as somebody who's disciplined, you see yourself that's somebody that's, working on yourself day in and day out, people will respect you and people will see you as that same individual, right? If you see yourself as like someone who's not confident, someone that is just focused on money, someone that doesn't add value to the world, and people are going to see that and they're not going to want to follow you, right? People want to follow a leader where they see values being added and somebody that's trying to grow and improve themselves. So for me, 100% right. Like you have to lead yourself to be able to lead other people. You have to see that within yourself, right? And so for, the mission right now, with the podcast name is called The Game Goes On, right? And it comes back to exactly what we're talking about right now. It's like I had a game of playing football, and that was the one thing that I focused on. But when it was all over, I had to find a new game. And my new game now is adding value to the world in a different way, but still having a vehicle, which is what I currently do, to add value in a different way than just football. So that's the whole purpose of the podcast is ultimately to help individuals like myself, like yourself, hear the stories that we went through to help the individuals that are currently going through that transition from a sport to the professional world. And they can hear other people, how they went through it, what they went through, to hear that, they're not alone and that they can reach out to us and they can reach out to other people and, just cling on to them and have a community, have that locker room outside the locker room.
Yeah. That's great, buddy. And anything we can do to help support that, dude, you just let us know, man. That's awesome. One of the things that you said that I want to go back on was you'd kind of mentioned your faith a little bit and how God has put obviously some significance in your life with that. Were you ever mad at God?
That is a good question. I've always been, I gave my life to Christ when I was 18. Up until that point, I didn't know who God was at all, right? I had a really strong relationship. I still do have a really strong relationship with him. So I've never really been mad at him because I've always believed that everything that's happened has happened for a reason. I believe that life happens to you and life happens for you and not to you, right? So the things that happen in my life are all for a reason that get me to one point or another. So if I struggle and I'm in pain, then I know that that pain is going to lead me to a better place down the future. And sometimes I understand that God's plan is specifically that, so I can be the man that deserves to lead other people. So when I'm struggling and I'm depressed and I'm going through something hard, I'm not necessarily mad at God. I'm like, okay, I trust in your plan and know that this is going to be something that I need to go through to be a better man, right? I'm obsessed with personal development and personal growth. And I understand that that pain, that hitting rock bottom or that pain of struggling will make me more pressurized to become a diamond down the road in the future. So God and I, I've never really been mad at him. I know he's never been mad at me.
Right.
We're good there. But, with that being said, there was a time when I was pursuing the NFL and I believed that that was his purpose for me. I believed that that was going to be everything. Yeah. But what I soon started to realize was that I was starting to chase the NFL no longer for him. I was chasing it for my own my own desires of the world, right? The money, the fame. As humble as I was outwardly, internally, I was still saying, like, I'm the man. Like, I'm the man. Like, I deserve this. Like, I put all this hard work in. Like, this is me. But God's looking up and saying, hey, I gave you those gifts. Like, I'm the one who allowed you to run those routes like that. Like, your speed, like those genetics, that's because of me. He's like, what are you doing right now? Like, this isn't what I've created you to do. Like, I've created you to impact others and be a light for my name, not for your name. Like, this kingdom is not your kingdom. Like, you're building something on sand right now, right? So I'm a firm believer that God made it apparent to me that, hey, the NFL is not going to be something long-term for you. I have something way, way bigger for you. Because if you continue to pursue this NFL thing, you're going to lose your soul, you're going to lose everything, and you're going to be at the rock bottom pit that you can't get out of.
It's so funny because a lot of what I'm hearing is the things that I felt myself, right? And it's awesome. Once again, I'm a little bit envious. I'm not going to lie that it took me 13 years to figure that out, and you figured it out in 4 years. I mean, that just goes to show you, what your journey is and what my journey was. And obviously, all these other athletes that are out there that have experienced this have different journeys as well too, right? And so I think it's really important. I think that community is really important for this to talk about it. And it's been fun. I've reconnected with a lot of my baseball buddies, and to kind of see where they're at and the journey that they had to go on in order for them to find out their better purpose and their bigger purpose, right? So what would you say right now? Like if you had to kind of articulate your purpose, what do you believe your purpose is now?
So I'm a firm believer in the quote that your passion's for you, your purpose is for other people, right? So my passion is personal development. My passion is getting better as an individual, right? I have this vision of when I'm 50, don't tell me exactly why 50 is the age, but I want to travel around to third world countries and build sports fields for kids. And that is ultimately the goal and the dream for my quote unquote retirement piece, for me to add value to the world. And up until that point, like I want to develop as many skills, resources, network, finances as possible and build as many businesses as possible to gain those skills and resources and become the man who deserves to run something that massive, right? So that is my passion to get to that point. My purpose ultimately is to share God's message through a vehicle that gets me to my passion at the end of the day, right? So for me, it's like, okay, through all of the insurance that I do, through the podcast, through the skills that through the networking, for me, it's just to be a kind, humble human being that points back to, to God at the end of the day. Like, hey, like this was me because of him, right? Give him the glory for everything. And my purpose is going to be based around adding value in that way and sharing any piece of advice or any of my story that can help make somebody else's life better, right? I'm a firm believer that if you're not making somebody else's life better, you're doing something wrong. Like that should be everybody's purpose at the end of the day, is finding a way to make somebody else's life better. And by doing that, we will be a better community, we will be a better world, everybody will be a whole lot happier. So if you can find a way to make somebody else's life better, like that should be your purpose. And the vehicle is irrelevant, right? Your vehicle and your passion, that should be aligned right. And then you should take that, your vehicle and your passion, and align it with your purpose of helping and being a steward to other people.
Yeah, Andy Stanley, and I'm not sure if you know who Andy Stanley is. He's a pastor of a huge mega church out in Atlanta, and I just absolutely love him. I highly recommend him. It sounds like it's a guy that you would really, really gravitate towards as well, too. And one of the things he talks about is when you're talking about your purpose and trying to find that purpose is that you should be the means to the end. And oftentimes people try to be the end of the means, right? And so if you are the means to the end, meaning that you are the conduit, right? You are the person trying to help other people, which is the end, as opposed to having everybody else be the people and you're the end result, right? Everybody else is helping you and that's it. And it stops at you. And so what I hear you clearly saying is that you want to be the means of it, so that the people, the others, God's people are the ones that are actually benefiting from it, and God is benefiting from it too. So it's really awesome to hear how your story is kind of trying to is saying that. So you keep talking about like, hey, listen, I want to keep learning and I want to continue to keep expanding. What are some of the authors? What are some of the books, podcasts that have impacted you? Because, listen, it doesn't just, the relationship with God is so important and there's so much wisdom. And that's an area of my life that I've been able to really be able to get some wisdom from, in my relatively young age still. But what is a book or what is something that has impacted you that you could say, man, if you're going to read a book, you got to read this book. Or if you're going to listen to a podcast, you got to listen to this podcast because this has done X for me.
It's funny you asked that because I've been having a lot of conversations with former athletes, and they've been asking like, hey, like, how do you get to like where you're at? Like, what are some great books to read? Like, et cetera, et cetera. And I always go back to the very first book I read that changed my perspective on life. I just had a different view and just like aha, right? And that book is, it has nothing to do with faith or religion or anything like that, right? It's Rich Dad, Poor Dad, right? Rich Dad, Poor Dad was like the main foundational book that started everything for me. It gave me a whole different view on the way that the world operates and how I should see the world and my purpose and finance. And I just started operating differently based around that book. I currently try to read one book a week. I know the average CL reads 52 books a year. Right. So if I can read one book a week, that'll put me on pace for that. Mm-hmm. There's just so many great books out there that really can, impact people. I think it's not one specific book. I think it's just a continuous journey of reading in general that allows you to have better conversations with people, that allow you to add more value to the world, that allow you to be more confident. Right. So just by plugging into, books in general, it does not necessarily have to be a book specific. But for me, like that is always a great place to start, right? And then if somebody has a desire, a passion to learn a specific subject, maybe they should dive into maybe Google or somebody in that space and find out what are some specific topic books, right? Because outside of that book and, a few other books, right? The Magic of Thinking Big and obviously Think and Grow Rich and How to Win Friends and Influence People, like all the main like big books that are out there that people should start with, right? I think people go on these journeys of personal development where they start reading a few books, right? And then they get on YouTube and then they start listening to all these videos and like, you got this, like you're a motivation, like, and they just listen to that on repeat over and over and over. And then they ask themselves like, man, I've been listening to this now for a couple of years. Like, why isn't anything improving? Why isn't anything changing, right? Yeah. And then they start realizing, okay, I got to do something different. And then if you can dive deeper into it, Dr. Joe Dispenza, he's a doctor that talks a lot about the brain and how the brain works. And he explains that between the ages of 0 and 7 are the most important years of our life, right? And those years are ultimately the years that dictate your environment, dictate the person you're going to become, and create the habits going forward. And it's because there's like three brain wavelengths, right? You got alpha, beta, and theta. And theta is the one like right before you fall asleep. And that's the creative mode. So if you're about to fall asleep and you get all these creative ideas, or if you're like in a shower and you're like kind of in the zone, like that's theta. And that's why you get all these really good ideas, which is the worst time, unfortunately, to get those ideas. But when you're a kid between the ages of 0 and 7, you're in theta all the time. So you're in creativity. You're taking in all these ideas from parents, your teachers, your environment, like everything, right? So if you're going to a toy store and your parents, you ask your parent, hey, can I have this toy? And your parent like, no, like you don't deserve it. You're not deserving. Like, let's go home, right? You had really no concept of what that meant, but your subconscious took it in like a tape recorder. And now for the rest of your life, all the way until you're 45, you keep telling yourself like, I'm not deserving. You're like, I'm not deserving of love. I'm not deserving of money. I'm not deserving of relationships. So you live your entire life like just not deserving, right? And so your subconscious is so powerful because it operates at 95% of the time. Your conscious is only operating at 5% of the time. So if you continuously watch YouTube videos over and over and over, like you're not going to change, because once you get to the age of 25 and over, you really can't change a whole lot unless you do a few things. And one of those things is hitting rock bottom. Hitting rock bottom is one of the main things that'll just like rock your world and change your environment, change your emotions, will change your subconscious. And habits. Habits is another big one, like continuously over time. So if you just listen to stuff like on YouTube over and over, YouTube, it's not going to be great for yourself to improve. You have to be super intentional on how to improve yourself.
Do you like quotes? Sounds like you kind of like quotes a little bit.
Quotes just sometimes just stick, and then those are the ones that come through. Yeah.
No, I love it. In fact, I've always admired people. Like anytime I'd hear like a public speaker and they would just ramble off these quotes, I'm like, dude, I want to be like you. I just love that, right? So do you have a quote that is kind of like your go-to, or like when you are talking with people? Because, a lot of the same questions come up, right? When you start having the similar conversations, and especially when you're really passionate about something, you're having a lot of the same type of situations occur. Is there a quote that always sticks out to you that you just love to talk about, or that has been meaningful or impactful to you?
I think one of the big quotes that has stuck with me, like from the beginning of the personal development journey, is like, don't wish it was easier, wish you were better, right? So everybody wants their current situation to be better. Like they want it to be sunshine and rainbows, and they want to all be millionaires, right? But nobody's willing to put in the work to become the person that deserves it, right? And it comes back to the same thing with like an elite athlete or someone who wins the lottery. Like they get all this money and then they spend all this money and they become broke. It's like, well, how did that happen? Like you just had so much money. Well, it's because they weren't the person that really deserved that type of money at the time. It just happened to fall in their lap because of it. So they didn't really know how to handle it. They didn't really know what to do with it. So it just kind of poofed and disappeared. So you need to become the person that deserves the $10 million, or the person that deserves the lottery ticket money for you to keep it, right? So it's the same thing with your work, same thing with your passions, the same thing with your relationships. Like if you want something to be better, you have to be better. So you have to work on yourself continuously. Yeah.
Awesome, buddy. Well, man, we went ways here. I had to actually re-record because it usually stops at about 30 minutes. So the vlog is going to have a little bit of an adjustment in there, but everything else should be normal. So, dude, this was awesome. I'm so glad that you came up. Thanks for being so vulnerable. Thanks for being so honest with this. I think people need to hear this message, man. And, one of the things that I think is so important as this has been a passion for me as well too, is that it's not just about athletes. I mean, this is musicians, it's military, it's other people that have realized that, hey, listen, I've chased this this business or whatever for so long, and then it was either ripped from me, or I realized like I was chasing the wrong thing, right? And so I think there's so many relatable things that people across the board can take away from this, because a lot of people find themselves in a pit and they're like, how do I get out of this, man? So I think that a lot of the information that you brought today was going to be empower people no matter where they're at in their life, that they can really start to make some momentum, because it is about making momentum. It's not about making life-changing things right now. It's just the little adjustments. What can they do to make some small improvements? Because it really has to start there.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And back to what you said, like it could be someone who was in prison for 20 years and they had to get out and they had to make a transition. It could be someone that was in a job for 20 years and they got fired and they had to make a transition, right? It could be someone who's had a job and has to retire that has to make a transition.
Yeah.
Military, like there's so many people that make a transition in life. It's even for normal students, right? You go from college to the real world, you have to make a transition, right? Yeah. So for me, it's like a huge passion of mine to be able to at some point speak. I'm actually kind of working on it right now, is going around the country to speak to these universities, athletes or non-athletes, and talking about that transitional phase and like, hey, this is what I wish I would have known when I was in school. This is what some of the things that you should be prepared for. This is some of the things you should do when you get out. And I'm going to give you the real nuts and bolts of like what the real world is like, because college is great for some aspects, but to prepare you for the real world, I'm not a huge fan and a believer that it's going to prepare you in all aspects, right? So yeah, like I couldn't agree with you more.
It's awesome. All right, guys. Hey, I know this was valuable. I know that you took some stuff away from here. So we always talk to you about this. Hey, listen, this is not just for you. So who do you know that needs to hear this message? Who do you know that this needs to get in their hands because they're at a place in their life right now that they're just stuck. And no matter what you say, it's not actually able to help them out. So I think this conversation could be great for them. And I really implore you, like, take the time to do this. This is what leaders do. They pour into the lives of other people. Sometimes it's not just about what you say, but it's what you provide for them. So Dominic, dude, thanks so much for being up here, brother. This has been awesome. And hopefully we get to do this again, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really had a lot of fun.
All right, guys. Hey, you guys have an awesome day, and we will definitely see you on the next episode.